welcome back to This Is Our Story. You have joined me, Kieran, and my sister Briar as we talk about some of the things that we've experienced over our life, and in particular at the moment we've been focusing on our early life experience growing up in country New Zealand, up in the far north. You've just joined us in our last episode. You might have thought that it may have been quite a brief, vague overview, and that's mostly because my memory of that time is so bad. But I think this next chapter in our lives is actually very important to our development as into adulthood, the teenage years. So this is chapter 2 really, the teenage years, and this is really where we were first introduced. That's not true. Not introduced, but we were kind of really I'm hesitant to use the word, but indoctrinated in kind of many of the things that became very kind of stalwart parts, foundational parts of our lives over the next 10 years or so. But anyway, before we get into it, welcome back, Briar. Anything interesting to share? You were saying before you had been delving into the old Plunkett book. So if you missed that in our last episode, the Plunkett book is a book that is like a medical history book, generally for kids.
It's like
I don't
a
know if they still exist these days, but it's just a record of any notes from when you were born or when we were taken to see the nurse and stuff. They would write notes. Now it would all be electronic, so perhaps we don't have them anymore. But back then it was the nurse would write a note, and they would also note vaccinations and such. And for some unknown reason, Briar still has hers, which literally has a kind of like a birth card thing in it. Yeah, go figure. Anyway, so what have you discovered, Briar?
So this was a little excerpt out of the book. So this was in January of 87, but this just goes to show what it was like in the 80s.
Another world.
And this is advice in the Plunkett book. It says, bringing up children is a big job, and it's not all lovely. Even though you love your child, there will be times when she makes you mad. So mad you hit her far harder than you meant to, or shout and growl more than you'd like. A parent can easily break a baby's bones or hurt her head by hitting. And words hurt too. If you call a child stupid and no good, often enough she'll believe it and give up trying to do better. So as you can see, smacking was quite common.
It's so passive aggressive. It's not like don't do it. Just
it's just
you
do it
should
gently.
be aware.
Hit gently.
Yeah.
Not too
Speaking
hard. Not
of,
too
we
soft,
didn't actually talk about this
Goldilocks.
last time. Is that the whole discipline thing for us started at a very young age? So mum and dad would give us the smack. Has a different meaning now, smack, but not that kind of smack. We had a specific spoon that stayed with us throughout our whole childhood and even teenage years. You will be surprised to hear.
Mostly me, not so much you.
Because I was a good boy, of course.
Yeah.
Golden
Favorite child and all.
But so mum and dad were very big on discipline, but they were also very particular in the way that they administered it. So they never wanted to use their hand, and they told us that quite early on. Actually, they wanted us to understand that they would never hit us with their hands. It was always had to be removed by a spoon,
which was way harder.
Yeah, Jesus. So I mean, it started out with wooden spoons, but then they just kept breaking. Apparently, I was so naughty when I was a kid. Probably the last time I was naughty. When I was really young, they used to give me a medicinal smack every day. just to remind me who's boss, I guess. But it was very some very traumatic memories actually from getting disciplined, but mostly the lead up to it, right? It was the anticipation, because we'd be out, and if I was naughty or if we were naughty, mum would always say something like, just wait until we get home.
And
dad will give you dad will give you the smack. And I remember
grab you
would be
under
at
the
work,
arm.
and he would come home from work and have to give us the smack. And so of course, as soon as he walked in the door, it'd be like, I'm the sweetest child you've ever met in your whole entire life.
But the poor
and being
guy
the kind,
home
hi Dad, trying to be all cute and cuddly.
Imagine dealing with that though, like coming home, you've had a hard day at work, and you probably, quite excited to see your kids, and then to be told, no, 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 you're on smacking duty tonight.
It's so messed up.
But we knew that if Mum said, your father will deal with you when he gets home, you knew
That
it
was
was
the
so
serious.
bad, yeah, that Mum was actually scared of how hard she was going to hit.
Yeah,
You
I
knew.
mean, it's a bit messed up, but in terms of the shades of messed up, it's kind of more on the lighter side, I think. Because I mean, I've heard many stories in my time of
Oh yeah, for sure.
people who have, experienced much worse in the way of discipline. Like mum and dad never used anything else aside from the one spoon,
Mm,
the one plastic spoon that to punish us.
mm.
So I guess there was this whole thing in growing up in church about spare the rod, spoil the child, and that was a very big part of their philosophy of parenthood. So they perhaps didn't do a lot of things like in terms of trying to teach us things about life, but I guess they did teach us about discipline and respect, and so I guess I
Mm,
could be grateful for that. But
mm.
yeah, many memories of the spoon. It didn't have a name, but it was just the spoon. Plastic
It,
spoon that stayed in the same
it,
place.
and all Mum had to do was rattle it in the
Yeah,
utensil jar, and
traumatic.
you'd shit yourself, and you'd run away upstairs and shut your door.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? I always very clearly remember Dad saying, "This hurts me more than it hurts you,"
Yeah.
and I'm like, "No, it fucking doesn't. You have no
He's,
idea."
he's like, how about you bend over and I give you a few good whacks?
I
Yeah.
don't think it's not that kind of show.
No.
I do remember, like, because if it was really bad, we would both get it for fighting, which did happen quite often
Mm.
later on when I learned how to be devious. But where we would like go in and compare smack marks.
Mine's
Always on the
redder than
bottom. Always on the
yours.
bottom. Bend over. Bend over. This hurts me more than it hurts you. Yep, the trauma. Anyway, so this episode we're focusing more on our time after moving from Kaikoura to Kirikiri. As I explained in the last episode, Kirikiri is a very different town from Kaikoura, very kind of middle, upper class, white predominantly. Very rarely would run into anybody who wasn't white. And it was at this time we started out when we first moved to Kirikiri. I think we still were going to the small country school in Pakaraka.
Yeah.
But after all the bullying that I experienced, Mum and Dad decided to take us out of that school. And then I believe at this time we had switched to a church, an Assemblies of God church in Kirikiri. And it just so happened that this church had a school attached to it, a Christian school. And basically for Mum and Dad, this was like it was the perfect scenario for them. It was a church that was run by people that they knew in the church, run by the pastor. He was also the principal, the pastor slash principal, which now as as a trained teacher myself, looking back at this, there's just so many things about this particular
Mm.
school that just are messed up.
So
But
much.
we'll
Yeah.
talk more in detail in this episode about the school itself. But yeah, we became very dedicated members of this church, and it was just a natural progression where they decided to send us to the school, which was a private school and it was expensive, but it was important enough to Mum and Dad that they send us to a place where we would be protected, basically, and then trained up in the way that we should go, to use that biblical
Which
term.
it was probably far from it, actually.
Yeah, I mean there are many things that were wrong with the school, but yeah, we'll get to that. So yeah, we're going to this Assemblies of God church, which if you're in church, you might understand. It was it was a part of the Pentecostal movement. The Assemblies of God church was part of the Pentecostal movement, which is not traditional. It's not a traditional church. It's a little bit
More
more.
modern.
Well, I mean, this was, I suppose, for the time, yeah, modern
Mm.
and more free flowing than your traditional church. So, say a Protestant or a Catholic church is very ritual based. where you go from one ritual to the next, and there's a very central figure who controls those rituals. In a Pentecostal church, it's more run by a pastor, but a pastor, as much as they have a position of authority, it's a little bit more flat in terms of hierarchy, because the idea of Pentecostal Christianity is that everybody has immediate access to God wherever they are at, and it's just a very different feel. And so this particular church was where us as a family and for us as children were learning about God. And previously we were just attending school. We were just too young to really know anything. But I think at this particular church is where we actually started to learn about God and apply it to our own lives. And especially once we were put into this Christian school. I don't know if you want to let's just spend some time describing the school. I'll just describe the school itself, Brian, and then I'll hand it over to you to talk about more about what we learned there. So the school itself was small. So imagine that the church and the school were all on the same grounds. And when we joined, there might have been about 60 students there, of different ages, from kindergarten all the way up to senior secondary.
I feel like it was less than that. Maybe
well, it decreased over time, but it was approximately 60 students. And there were only 3 classrooms, I believe, at that time. One for the kind of middle, like upper primary and secondary were all together, I think, at one point. And
it
then there
was
was
from new entrance, though.
Yeah, there was a primary classroom, and then there was a new entrance classroom. And the building itself, like I said, was attached to the church. And so a lot of our activities there was a very vague grey line between a church activity and a school activity. A lot of our things were done in the church building, and so we were just around church constantly. In fact, got to the point where you wouldn't be able to really tell the two apart. In terms of the grounds, it was quite a nice setting for a school. Like quite a large outdoor area around. It wasn't really designed as a school. The school had definitely been an afterthought, but there was a small field for us to play sport, but definitely not a proper field like a quote unquote normal school. We had a basketball court, and then there was a large outdoor area, a section, a little bit of bush that we used to play in a lot. It was quite nice. In hindsight, it was quite a nice place to be as kids. There were restrictions on what we could do, but very, very much so, this was a school context that it seemed like the people who ran it were just making things up as they went along, because the rules kept changing about what we could and couldn't do in the space. So now that we've talked more about the school, the physical school itself, Brian, you want to talk about the curriculum and how that worked?
So I was 9 when we first started there, so you must have been about 11 or close to it. So the curriculum was based on an American, also Christian, I don't know what you call it.
Well, it's called Accelerated Christian Education, or ACE. It's a very traditional, it would definitely be connected with some kind of Christian movement, traditional Christian movement in the States. Maybe more almost like a Southern Baptist kind of thing. It was quite very traditional and very traditional ideas. All the content was Christian based.
Yeah. And so it was nothing you could ever really imagine school would be like. In a public school system, you would have, I don't know, at that young age, you might have reading and mat time and do a bit of writing maybe, and it may be a little bit more play based, whereas this was from the new entrants. They have these books. You'd have your maths, English, social studies, science, and one called word building, which is kind of like an extension of English, spelling, and those were sort of your main 5 subjects. But the books themselves, I personally felt like I wasn't academic at all, and it was so easy just to go through these books, because on the left-hand side you'd have a page where you'd read, and then on the other side would be sentences with blanks where you had to
It
fill in the
it was
blanks.
reading comprehension tasks.
Yeah, basically, but all of the subjects were the same, basically. So you just read, and you're not even really learning. You're just
You're
skim reading
memorizing.
over it. Yeah, memorizing. And so it was the same when it came to the tests. So the tests were pretty easy. So throughout the
And just
whole,
to like back up a second, the core tenet of this particular curriculum system is that teachers do not teach; they
or no, and they
supervise. And
don't
in fact, they're not
interact
called
with you at
teachers; they're
all.
called
No,
supervisors.
yeah,
And you didn't necessarily have to be a qualified teacher
which a
to
lot of them
do.
weren't.
Yeah, so I mean, we did, in order to be registered as a school, we did have a couple of registered teachers,
Mm.
but they didn't really teach. It
But
was
to be
all about
honest, they
self-learning.
probably didn't, yeah, even really know how to teach us, because it wasn't like your traditional blackboard where you'd write and sit as a class and discuss things. It was, we had our own desks with dividers on each side, so we couldn't
Yeah.
look at the person next to you.
It was very much, it was like it was like doing homework at school, and that's why this particular curriculum is often used for homeschooling students, because it's not about interaction, it's not about learning from other people. It's very much you stick with the books, you finish the book, you do a test, and that's it, and you go on to the next book. That is the next level up. And basically, yeah, you'd have these dividers, and then if you needed any assistance, or you, so we had a central marking station. So at each certain points, you'd have to get to that
And
point, and
it's
then you'd have
crazy
to
that
go and
the students were the ones marking their own work.
yeah, and people
So
cheated all the time. It's so
yeah,
easy.
the teachers literally didn't do anything. They sat at their desk.
Well, they weren't teachers. Let's be clear, they're
Yeah.
just not teachers. And you would put up a little flag. This is crazy. You put up a little flag up on in your a little hole in your divider to
You'd
call
have two
attention to the
different kinds of
teacher.
flag,
The
remember?
teacher would come across, and they would very briefly inspect what you'd done, and then give you permission to go and mark your own work. So there was literally no real educating going on. It was just all based on how good you were at reading and memorizing answers.
So you were screwed really if you weren't a good reader. You know, some of the kids there didn't come from, great backgrounds, or they may have had.
Learning difficulties.
Yeah, that's it. Learning difficulties.
Learning difficulties did not exist in the system, and
and they weren't catered for in the slightest.
Yeah, and as we previously mentioned in the last episode, I was a gifted reader and a gifted studier and a very interested in gaining knowledge, and so I excelled.
But
In this
even for
particular system.
myself, I think, like, I have never been academic, but I think because we both, our parents valued books and reading, we had access to books constantly. We were good readers, so that system probably suited our style maybe, but just when you look back in the long run, we didn't really learn anything.
Yeah, I don't get anything from it, if I'm really honest.
No.
I gained a passion for history. So the thing, okay, let's take a step back a little bit. So the other key thing about this system is that you were allowed to go at your own pace. That was the key. So you weren't necessarily divided up by grade level or age even. It was just all about whether you could, or it was how fast you could complete a book. And the idea is you just keep going until there are no books left. And once you finish those books, then you would get to choose. I mean, there were different levels. So there might be 10 books to one level. For example, I don't really remember how many, but once you finish those 10, you'd go to the next level. And once you'd run out of levels, you got to choose your own subjects. And because I was such a natural reader and I had a good memory for reading and things that I'd read, I just got really far ahead. And I was able to choose. It gave me freedom to choose a lot of history subjects, which is something that I'd always been interested in, as I touched on last time, about war and such. And so, yeah, I did get opportunities to pursue other history subjects, but they weren't great.
And it was American history as well.
The quality of the material that we were doing was not great. And of course, as we said just before, there was a lot of Christian material through there. There was no very closed to other ideas. So it was very creation based. We didn't really learn real science. No. It just didn't exist. And because we were in church constantly as well, when you're being told this literal Bible history, like history literally based on the Bible, and anti-evolution, anti-Big Bang, anti-science. The scientists are all out to get us by coming up with all these stories.
And we didn't do any science, like a typical public school has.
No,
Like you'd go
no
to
science
science
lab.
and do all those experiments. We had none of that. Apart from we had an old guy that used to come in a caravan.
Yeah, and that
Like
was
once
only
a
for
month, I think.
yeah, I think it was for 1 year maybe, or even less. There were no facilities, no real school facilities at the school, and yeah, it was really tough. And I didn't know how tough it was at first, but as I moved further through my, well, not didn't even have grades right, but as I got older, I started to realize just how lacking our school was when we started to make friends with people who went to other schools in the area, which had everything, and that was really tough. But I do have very clear memories of, we had this thing called honor roll. So honor roll was basically about those who
We're academic.
were academic, yeah. So that it was literally based around test scores. So if you had an average above 88% or something, or
No,
90,
it was you had to do a minimum of 3 books per subject over the whole term. So 3 books in maths, 3 in English, and that was the
Yep.
minimum. So if you were academic, you would fly through that.
Yeah, but I think
Excuse me.
there was also something to do because we had gold stars. Don't you remember this? We had stars.
Yes.
It was a red star for less than 90%, I think, or 80.
80. Yeah.
And then a gold star for anything above. And they used to count these stars, and that would get you on the honor roll. And if you were on the honor roll, you got to go on some kind of class outing or trip with all the other people on the honor roll. So fucked up because there are some people who literally
it was setting you up to fail, right? All those kids that
some
were
people
never going to
literally
do
never
it.
got on that list.
Yeah.
And I got in, I think, almost all of them. Maybe I missed out, maybe once. And it destroyed me. Like, I was so gutted. And one particular memory I have of that time, I was trying really hard to finish off a book. I'd had a hard term. I'd been failing in maths. And actually, this is really important for me because this time is what really cultivated a real distaste for anything math related.
And because you didn't really get support from the teachers, right? Because they didn't know didn't know what they were doing. So how were we supposed to teach
I remember
ourselves?
trying to finish off a book in time for the honor roll cutoff, and I just boosted my way through a book, got it all marked, ready to take up to my supervisor, the principal / pastor. He had a lot of role titles actually, and anyway, he said that wasn't good enough, and he rubbed it all out, and some half a book I think he rubbed out in front of me. So I mean, what mixed signals, Jesus! Like when you're trying to encourage people to achieve academically, but at the same time, only when I say that you can. It was just all control based, and I do think that the school had a lot of control at its center, which is very connected because it was so connected with church life, and we couldn't. The fact that we were being quote unquote taught by our pastor made it very difficult to question anything. And
what made it really awkward as well was, we're in that building 6 days a week, and our parents were friends with the pastor. So sometimes on a Sunday, we would be at their house for lunch or whatever.
The boundary lines were very confusing. Very confusing.
Make it very awkward. You sort of didn't almost really know how to behave. And it's like, you can't tell me off. It's a Saturday or a Sunday. Like, you're not my teacher today.
And Mum and Dad were very strict on that. We treat the pastor and his wife basically as teachers. All interactions were to be respectful. So we were never allowed to call them by their first names, and we were never allowed to question. We always had to be super polite. And it wasn't like that for everybody. Like all other adults, it was just them in particular. So it was a very confusing relationship that we had. That particular this guy and his wife, who was also involved at the school, and to this day, I still have problems with them. Like, I couldn't imagine being in a room with them because I came away from that whole school experience with definitely some resentment. I mean, other things that from memories from that time, Winnie the Whale.
Yes.
So corporal punishment was not an issue when we first started. It wasn't until later on that it became outlawed. I don't know if that seems dramatic to say outlawed. It become illegal to hit anybody at school. Although, because we were a private school, I think we somehow managed to escape with we did get away with some things. But yeah, Winnie the Whale. So if we got in trouble, if it was serious, or I don't know, I know you had it. I don't know if I did.
Yeah.
But
I don't think so. You were too much of a goody two shoes. I was the rebellious one.
I was secret rebellion.
I was just straight up. I didn't hide it.
So things that were considered serious.
But do you want to know what I got my one for? So I think I only ever got it once. But the reason why I got it, which sounds so stupid now, but it's because I wasn't doing my homework.
Yeah.
And I wasn't doing it. It was because I found it hard. I wasn't academic. I used to leave that subject till very last at school because I didn't enjoy it and I struggled with it. So then I'd have to take it home for homework, and I couldn't complete it there because I didn't know what to do and my parents couldn't help me do it either. And so I was punished. I mean, this was repeat offence, I guess you could say, is because it was always the same subject and I wouldn't do it at home because I didn't know what I was doing. And so after many times being told off and getting detention for not doing my homework, Dad was called in to come in from his day's work, or, you know, while he was at work, to come and punish me and smack me with this Winnie the Whale. Honestly, yeah, it is. And it blows my mind, like, that this actually happened. It's so surreal. But, and so, you know, you'd go into the office and the principal would talk to you and giving you a dressing down, and then
and I think this is how they got away with the rules, because it wasn't them doing it. It was the parents.
Yeah, it always had to be the parent. And then the principal would leave the room, and then I'd be bent over my dad's lap and smacked. And then you'd have to go back into fucking class acting like you hadn't been crying for getting a smack.
Actually, I do have a very vague recollection of the principal giving me a smack on the hand. I do actually remember that now that I think about it. And that was, I do remember me and a few other boys who'd been quote unquote naughty and we all got a smack on the hand. Yeah, it was a bit more than a bit messed up. But looking back, it was that time in my life is really strange because it was such a small world and so many things about that time are so mixed up with each other, because church life and home life and hobby life was all tied up with the same people and the same places. And
very small circle of people.
Very small circles. But the only time that I really kind of got out of that circle was when I was playing soccer. So I'd started playing soccer when I was really young in Kaikoura. I don't really remember much about it, but I was very passionate about soccer, or football as I prefer to call it. But I remember playing with a team that was from the local high school, and quite traumatically, I got selected. I was quite good. I got selected for a rep squad, and part of that squad was the boy who actually, the father of the boy who used to bully me at Pakaraka School mercilessly, and that was already awkward because I hadn't really dealt with that in my younger years, and then all of a sudden it was just all in front of me, and then that boy actually ended up joining the team. And this football coach, he was a very kind of old school English guy who was very passionate about football and really tough on us in the way that English football coaches often are. And I found that really challenging, but it was my only experience really about meeting people outside of those church circles. And I do remember very clearly his dad. I had to they gave me a ride home because they lived not far away from us in Pakaraka. And I remember him saying, "Look, I know that you and Jimmy have some history, and I just want you to just get over it." And that was it.
I don't
This
remember
guy who
this.
like bullied me horrendously for literally years was like, just get over it. And that kind of really messed me up, and it really, I didn't have a lot of confidence. As much as I loved the sport, I didn't have much confidence in myself personally at that time because it had just been beaten down on me, and I definitely was being bullied elsewhere. But interestingly enough, at that school, I became a bully at that time as well, and I started being quite mean to some of the younger kids, which is interesting. Not surprising, but interesting. What do you remember? Do you have any specific memories about school itself?
I mean, this Christian school was where the bullying started for myself, which is ironic, really, that, our parents withdrew us from a public school to put us into a Christian school, and I just got absolutely bullied so badly, like to the point where, I mean, I remember going home sometimes and just crying and just wanting to jump out the window of our two-storied house. Like, it was that bad. Yeah, so I hated school. I really did. And the people that we used to hang out with in school often went to the church as well. So again, that very small circle. And then, after church, it was quite common for people to invite you over for lunch or whatever. It's quite social after church. You go and get lunch and you hang out together. And I mean, I vividly remember being actively excluded from, all the kids my age would be like, "Oh, do you want to come to the river and we'll go for a swim or whatever?" But I wouldn't be invited. And I just remember being so upset by that. But like, I had good friends in the school as well. That's where I met my best friend Anna, who's still in my life now. And we did lots together in school and outside of school. She lived just up the road from us. And she was a big influence on my life and probably sort of kept me going through those really rough times of bullying. And she was sort of my voice of reason and the stability I needed probably at school, because I wasn't confident at all either. And yeah, I think I spent lots of time in hospital too, just due to health reasons. And so yeah, I think all those things kind of, which I was bullied for, of course, at school, that really knocked my confidence too. And I think at that time I remember feeling like maybe it was because you were being bullied too, I don't know, but I felt like, oh, Kieran doesn't even stand up for me either. And so I felt so lost a lot of the time.
I think it was during these years that you and I drifted apart a lot because
Yeah.
I had some friends, but at the same time, like for me, it's quite a mixed set of memories because on one hand, I know that I had some friends, but at the same time, I know that I was desperate to try and fit in, and I never
Mm.
did. I was never felt like I was cool enough, and I was always trying to impress, but I was always on the periphery. So, for example, I'd have sleepovers with some of the guys from school, and they'd be playing PlayStation and
Mm.
watching movies and stuff, and I desperately wanted to be there, but I was always on the outside. And I
Mm.
do remember those years as being very lonely. And
But also
it's
the
funny because like both you and I were lonely at the same time, but
yeah.
we didn't want to have anything to do with each other.
No. But also the friends, the boys that were your friends were probably in that group that our parents probably didn't really want us hanging out with those kids outside
Mm.
of their supervision so they could see what was going on. Like, their families were maybe a little bit rougher, maybe a bit more relaxed in terms of Christianity.
Yeah, a bit more worldly.
Yeah, or secular, as our parents probably would say. So although we had friends at school, they couldn't control who we hung out with at school, but outside of school they probably weren't that keen on you hanging out with those boys.
Yeah, well, I do definitely remember one guy who joined our school who was very much an outsider in every shape and form. And I became friends with him because I just identified with him a little bit. at that time, but he he didn't have he didn't have parents. I can't remember for what reason, but he lived with his grandmother, and became friends with him as a Māori boy. I don't know if you remember him. He wasn't there very long, but I remember having a sleepover with him and then staying up late because he had no rules set for him by his grandmother. He could do whatever he wanted, which is quite a new experience for me. And we stayed up late to watch the Spice Girls naked performance. This was like my first experience doing anything kind of a bit naughty. And because of the time, it was pretty what's the word? Pretty tame by today's standards. But back then, this was massively exciting for a young teenage boy to be watching these goddesses up on stage, supposedly naked, even though they weren't really. God, it's ridiculous thinking about it now. But I mean, I guess that kind of just reminds me of some of the other things, because this is when I think we really started to notice some of the restrictions that we had on us in comparison to other families. And I think music was a big one. So this was a time of life when I was really discovering music as something I was really passionate about, both playing. I played a lot. I played the drums at that stage and started playing drums in church quite young, about age 11, I think. And so I was just passionate about music. And
you were self-taught basically and all of those things, weren't you? I still remember you everywhere you went, you were drumming on walls and the stool and the bench top.
Someone bought me a set of drumsticks when I was really young, and I just kind of would hit anything. Yeah, like when I would come across music, and then at the same time, we weren't allowed to listen to anything that wasn't acceptable by mum and dad's standards, which were very strict. So the only things we were allowed to listen to were the Christian radio station, Radio Rima, which had very little music at all, though, to be honest.
Mostly talkback.
And Radio New Zealand, which is, I don't know, like the BBC, basically. Yeah, pretty boring. Pretty boring stuff.
For kids, yeah.
Yeah. So, that whole idea of when we were getting exposed to these different ideas about life, different ideas about opinions about music and things like that, it was just interesting to see what we developed in terms of what was bad and what was good. So, for example, I had very strong views about certain types of music that made me feel uncomfortable because I thought they were morally bad. Like, I can't think of a specific example.
I have a very
clear recollection. A rap, like hip hop, no way. That was the devil's music.
Yeah.
But I have a very clear recollection of Backstreet Boys. And at this stage, I had a friend. We were best mates, and then he was allowed to kind of listen to whatever he wanted. And our parents did not approve of this, but they couldn't say anything. They just were very clear about what I wasn't allowed to listen to. Anyway, he discovered the Backstreet Boys, and he was trying to convince me that it would be okay. And so then I had to present a case to my mum, to our mum, about why Backstreet Boys would be okay for me to listen to. And Philip's mum also helped by saying, just like, I remember very clearly reading the booklet, because it was a CD, of course, the lyric booklet, and they're reading out the words. And she's saying, oh, it's not that bad. It's just a love song. And, they're actually Christians, And that was always the golden word, the phrase, that would kind of make things okay. They're Christian. But then it got to, everybody. And the chorus, but it got up to, am I sexual?
Turn it off. That's it. We're done.
We're done. And just the look on Mum's face was one of extreme discomfort. And that was it for Backstreet Boys. No more. No more Backstreet Boys. And then, so Philip was also the one who first introduced me to trance music as well, years later. The kind of very early on, he showed this to me, and it was, back then, it was very kind of I can't think of words to describe it, but it's very airy and just heavy bass and then lots of French talking. But because when I listened to it, because by that stage my moral compass had been so firmly ingrained by mum and dad, it made me feel uncomfortable to listen to. I knew that it was possibly demonic.
So where did the love of Michael Jackson come in then? Because I feel like that was with Oliver
That was
from the
much,
early
much
years.
earlier. That was Oliver, and I don't know why mum and dad put up with that.
Because I wonder if that was more with like at Oliver's house listening to it, because I feel like they wouldn't have
Probably
agreed.
the dancing aspect. They didn't. Mum and dad were kind of innocent about that stuff. They didn't really get it. And generally, Michael's Jackson stuff was kind of innocent, I suppose, as love songs. It was when they started hearing the stories about, his dodgy business. That's when we started to not hear it so much around the house. Yeah, but I mean, we didn't have music around at home though. Really, not until like maybe mid-teens did we started buying CDs and having our own collections. But it was always
Well, it
CDs
was like
from the Christian.
mum and dad stuff. But then dad would, we grew up listening to Van Morrison and Kenny G. Dad loved that kind of stuff, and
He
that
still loves it.
yeah, he does. Yeah, that's not strictly Christian.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even. So I don't know where.
Well, I do remember mum and dad having an argument about whether Van Morrison was singing to God or singing to a woman. And dad was trying to convince mum that actually he was singing the song to God. So like I said, naive. But music was a tricky thing. I do remember sneakily listening to other radio stations in my room. And that's the only time I was really exposed at home to other music. But then hearing mum and dad come home from work, because you remember we were at home by ourselves a lot. Hearing them come home and then quickly switching it off, and then switching it over to, I don't know,
Radio Rima.
Yeah, basically. Trying to think, do you have any other memories from that time that stand out to you?
Not that I can think of. I mean, there was lots of times that we'd hang out with friends, like, and have the sleepovers. But even I remember going to, like how you were saying, it was so deeply ingrained it made you feel uncomfortable. Like I remember going to a friend's house who, again, their parents were probably a bit more loose with the rules, and they were watching, what's it called? Steve-O. What's their
Jackass.
Yeah, Jackass. So we were watching it must have been
like
one of
the
the early ones.
The things that mum hates.
Yes, and I think the particular scene where he strapped meat to his balls and was hanging over a pit of crocodiles or something, and they were snapping up, and I remember walking out just feeling like so dirty and disgusted with myself that I had let myself slip and watched that. But everyone, all our friends were there. I think it was maybe a group from youth group. So everyone was there watching it, and I was like, why is no one else walking out?
Yeah. I think
but that was, again,
very
the moral
early
compass.
on we had that guilt reflex that kind of ingrained, because not all parents obviously were as strict, but we had thought it was just normal that mum and dad were doing it the right way. And I think it took a really long time for me to lose that guilt reflex whenever I saw something that I knew they wouldn't agree with. I mean, some of the other things we didn't get as throughout that period was, like, we didn't have a TV. Although I have some of my best memories actually of that time, where mum and dad would allow me to hire out a TV. Well, we had to borrow the TV from the school. That's the kind of school it was. You could borrow a TV from the school, and then hire out a PS2, and then a game, usually Medal of Honor, and then playing with my friends nonstop all weekend until we clocked the game. And like that, those are good memories. So I appreciate that they allowed that. But then at some point, because during these years, I was obsessed with war and war stories, war books, history books, and everything. That actually, I do remember Dad trying to convince me to stop, because he was concerned that I was too obsessed with war. And Dad has always been quite a peacemaker, a pacifist, and like he wouldn't allow me to read my my war comics, my commando comics on the way to church, for example. Yeah,
To cloud your
didn't like that.
thinking.
Yeah.
We must have had I don't know if we'd hired one, but we must have had, because I do remember we had lots of VHS, like David Attenborough stuff that we used to watch, because that was, general audience stuff. So we
used
must
to
have.
take it to Grandma's house. I remember watching there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that
like
makes
Milo and
sense.
Otis was a classic.
Yes, it was a favorite. Yeah,
Yeah.
The Incredible Journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is kind of like, well, there's actually been more to talk about in this particular time than I was expecting. So we might have to take a break there, but then probably delve more into some of the more on the church stuff. We talked a lot about the school experiences, but probably getting more into church and to youth group, which is a really key time for both of us in a lot of ways, in terms of the way that we thought about the world, and also the way that my life was heading was very much guided by those experiences. So we'll probably just leave it there for a moment, and then we'll come back and continue this conversation. And I feel like we're getting a little bit more specific into what we're talking about in terms of big topics as we get a bit older. It's almost like we're on a real journey of life, because as you get older, obviously you start thinking more deeply about things, and it's like this is happening in real time, which is interesting. But this is a project that will evolve over time for both of us, and hopefully the purpose of it will become a little bit clearer as we get on as well. But there is a lot to share, and I think in the next little while, when things start getting a little bit weird in terms of the religious aspect of our story. So stick around for that. Thank you, and I guess we'll catch you next time.
Ciao.